came out tonight, hoping to get the valve clearances set. I'm going to use the Newman cams figures because they have the ramps on them, and they recommend 12 thou for the inlets and 14 thou for the exhaust. So that's probably what I'll go with to start with. And I was going to make sure the rocker covers were torqued down correctly, and one of the figures I've been given to use for that was 20 foot-pounds. So I started torquing them up to that, and I got to the last one, and anybody who's ever been threading a bolt into a hole or a nut on a stud or something like that, and the thing starts stripping, will know that feeling of, this should be getting tighter, but it just isn't. And you sort of keep turning it, hoping that it'll actually torque up, and you know it's just a forlorn hope. Well, I was kind of getting that feeling, and then I heard a little ping, and I realized what had happened. One of the repairs I had done on the head across the bridge had cracked. So I had to take everything off, strip the head down completely again, and basically re-weld it up. First, I used the die grinder to remove all the old braze from it, the silicon bronze, and cleaned it back to bare metal as best I could. And this time, instead of using TIG, which is what I did last time, I don't have any TIG gas, I decided to use oxyacetylene. And I was careful to heat everything up as much as I could, as evenly as I could, brazed the crack up and built up over it to give it a bit more strength, and then let everything cool down by itself slowly. So that's kind of where I got to. I then had to, the old helicoil came out pretty easily. I had to re-helicoil it for the stud and then repaint it. I got most of the way through reassembling it, and then suddenly realized, I need to paint it. So I left the last valve spring and valve out, so I could get paint around the repair. Not that it matters, because it's all covered in oil, of course, but that's what I ended up doing. So I had to mask off instead of taking the valves out again, I thought I'll just mask them up. So that's what I did. So that paint is drying now. I'm going to leave that overnight and then come back to it tomorrow evening or in the weekend, I guess, and see if the stud will torque up again. So that's a bit disappointing. I am definitely getting a lot faster at assembling and disassembling this thing, so I can get the valves in and out pretty quickly now. Now I know how to do it. I think I'm going to try, I did try the fiber washers. I have been warned that they won't hold together. They'll break and fall apart. I think originally there were fiber washers there. I'm not sure exactly. So I did do these ones up. As I say, they got done up to 20 foot-pounds, and they've actually held up pretty well. It might depend on the washers. These ones are quite thin. So I think when I re-torque it up, I'm going to try it to a slightly lower torque figure, maybe 15 foot-pound, and see what happens. But I may end up replacing these washers. It's very hard to know what they used originally. The parts book doesn't show a lot of these little bits and pieces, sort of nuts and bolts and washers and things don't really get mentioned unless they're special ones. So I think it'll just be a matter of trial and error, because you need quite a bit there to get them to seal, and of course they have to resist the pressure of the valve springs. But I think that's it for tonight. That's sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, I guess. I've been doing various little jobs on the engine, but one I wanted to do and I'm just showing now, while it's all still set up, is I cut the end off one of these cast iron exhaust manifolds, and I brazed on a patch to cover up the hole. I also ground out on the inside here. On the normal ones, there's a sort of divider, I guess you'd call it, inside here, which is what diverts some of the exhaust back around to the hot spot. I don't need any of that, so I've just opened this up entirely. Oxyacetylene brazed a mild steel plate on the end just to close it off, and then cleaned all of that up. This was fairly rusty and pitted, so I set it up in the mill here just so I could face the mounting surface, and it was a bit tricky trying to get this to work. My setup here might not be the best. It's basically bolted down through two of the hold down bolts. I would have liked to have done three, but it's a little bit awkward, and I may have been able to turn around one of these 1, 2, 3 blocks to get it across the other mounting stud. But this worked pretty well. A mill like this, I mean, it's pretty big, but it's still only just a hobby mill, so it doesn't really have a lot of rigidity. But because I was fly cutting it, I was only taking very, very small passes. It worked fine. So I've now got a nice smooth mating surface on there. It would be good to do that on the output flange as well, but I really can't figure out any way to mount it without making something so that I could do that. So that one I'm leaving for now. As I say, I just want this to have something to bolt on the engine when I do the first run up. I'm not actually going to be using this as the exhaust on the car. I'm going to make an exhaust for that. So I probably won't even have a pipe on the end there. And if I do, it doesn't matter if it doesn't seal perfectly. So not much else to say about this. I really like fly cutting. For some reason, fly cutting is one of my favorite things to do on the mill. I think just because it's gentle and it gives you a really nice finish, and you can do it with tools that you've made yourself. So I made the little fly cutting head, and it works beautifully. You get a nice, perfectly smooth and flat finish on things. I don't know, it's just very satisfying doing it. The Land Rover's sitting outside just at the moment. I took off the rear bumper, which is sitting over there. It had been dinged up in one corner, so I unbolted it, which is just 2 bolts, and straightened it out where it had been dinged, just with a hammer and a piece of brass bar. Just bashed it roughly into shape. Because it had been dinged, the paint or the powder coat or whatever it is they've got on it had cracked, so it had rusted all underneath there. I'm pretty sure it's some sort of powder coat because it's just flaking off where it gets cracked. So I ground all that back and put in a little bit of filler because it was really pitted, and I've given it a coat of paint on the inside. Once that's dry, probably tomorrow evening or the day after, I'll spray the outside of it as well, and that's good anti-rust paint, so hopefully that'll stop it rusting. And since the Land Rover's outside, I may or may not have taken the Austin 7 out for a little bit of a shakedown run, a test run. Obviously it's not road legal yet, so if I did, I figured, well, if the cops stop me, I'll just say I'm on my way to a protest, and they'd probably close the roads and give me an escort. But it is running really well. I can't remember what the last tweak I did to it was. I was playing around with the carburetor, but I never really got a chance to go and test it properly. But whatever I did has made a big difference. There doesn't seem to be any hole in the throttle response now. So I think I've got the needle quite close to what the settings should be. And since I tightened up the rear torque tube ball joint, the shuddering on reverse has gone away as well. So the only thing I think that isn't working properly is the dynamo. I don't think that's charging, so I'll need to look at that at some point. But it goes well. So hopefully I'll be able to find out about getting this on the road properly soon. It is quite fun to drive. It's changing gear is easy. It's very loud, so doing things like trying to blip the throttle, you can't even really hear the engine to hear what it's doing, so it makes it a bit tricky. The other thing I found is you pretty much have to drive it everywhere with the throttle flat to the floor, so which is good. It's because the roads around here are all fast roads, so they're either 60 kilometre or 80 kilometre an hour roads. But it was a fun little diversion. So on the the Riley, I haven't done anything else with the brakes yet. I need to get back onto them, but I have been playing around with the engine some more. Putting it on top of cardboard to see where it leaks. One, my little drip tray leaks. That's why there's a big pool of oil on one side. This leak here is because I'd actually forgotten to bolt the little sludge inspection cover, which is on the bottom of the sump. I don't know if we can see that. Let's see. No, I can't get it to angle correctly. Oh no, there we go. So up under there's a little square plate, and you can remove that to check the oil from the bottom, and I'd bolted it in place but just finger tight, so it was leaking oil from there. It isn't actually full of oil yet. That will just be oil that I squirted into the rockers. I have noticed there's oil here as well, which is interesting, that it's already leaking there. I'm not sure where that would have come from. I did wipe all of these down with oil just because they're bare steel, just to stop them rusting. So I think it's just from that. I can't imagine oil working its way up there any other way. This is the tube for the ignition wires, which actually I need to order those. And you can buy proper clips for these, but I just made some. They're just mild steel, and I nickel plated them and cleaned them up. I actually forgot that they were in the plating solution. I've just remembered there's something else in the plating solution I've forgotten about. And put on a really good thick coat, but it was quite grey. So I polished these up, and they came up really well. And they gave it a very old-fashioned look, because the whole thing's not shiny, just the bits I could polish. So the rest of it's kind of a bit grey and dull looking, and it looks really good. Because this is just mild steel, not any sort of springy steel, I looped them around the tube. I've actually got a piece of cloth tape between the tube and the metal clamp, and I just used some lock wire, you can see here, just to clamp it up, and that's held everything in place perfectly. And I machined down a couple of these acorn nuts, just so they didn't look too ridiculous sticking up. They're more of the same height as the middle one, and that's what's holding those on. The carburetors are just sitting there. They're actually just resting on a stud. This needs to be bolted on, and unfortunately the bolts are actually in here, in the middle. So I need to take the actual carburetors off the manifold to be able to get to those bolts before I can bolt those in place. So I haven't done that yet. It's going to be a little bit of a pain. It won't be too bad getting to the nuts and the bolts that hold these carburetors in place. These are H1. No. I can't remember the exact name of them. But they're off a early Morris Minor, apparently. So they're about 1-inch throat. A little bit bigger would be nice, but that's what I was able to get. The original ones ran on all sorts of different carbs, but one of them ran on 2 OM1 carbs, which are very similar to these. So these should work. The thing I just remembered is in the plating solution is the choke linkage, which goes here. I'm going to have to figure out some sort of cable stop, probably off one of these mounting bolts. These are this is the mount for the magneto. So that goes on there. I've laser cut a gasket for in there, and I've got a lot better at figuring out how to draw the gaskets. What I do now is I take the part and I actually lay a rule across it and then take a photograph of it using a narrow lens, not a wide angle lens, so I don't get as much distortion. And then I can import that into my CAD software. And because there's a ruler on it, I've got an exact scale to be able to calibrate it. And that works really well. So I've laser cut the gasket that goes in there. I also laser cut new gaskets here. I'm not using any at the moment. You can see here, this is that's one of the gaskets I cut for the magneto housing. The actual one I use has got slightly smaller holes there to fit the studs better. And that was my test piece for the rocker cover gaskets. Just cut out of brown paper. So that should all be good. The throttle linkage is here. That I'll have to figure out how that works down to the steering box. So the way it normally works is the throttle pedal goes to the steering box, and then it goes through a shaft that goes through the top of the steering box to bring it across to this side. So the throttle linkage is somewhere here. So that's all good. I've put in these are the proper spark plugs I'm using, which are Champion, what are they? D16s? I didn't have much choice, to be honest. This is what I was able to find locally. I have found other ones, but they're really expensive here. So if I need to get different plugs, I'll probably get those from the UK. I think it'll be cheaper. And the exhaust manifold, I cleaned it all up. I'm really enjoying using those little Rolock sanding discs on a right-angled die grinder on the air compressor. It works really well. And I also discovered my little wire brushes that I usually use in my drill also work really well. When they're air powered, they tend to fly apart, to be honest, but they work really well while they're still holding together. So I just cleaned the manifold up and gave it a coat of high temperature paint for now, just mainly so it doesn't rust, because otherwise it would rust almost immediately. And probably when I want to test fire the engine, I'll just put a temporary pipe on here just to get the exhaust away from everything. I imagine the first time you start it up, it's quite smoky. So that's pretty much where that is at the moment. This is all bolted back on. I need to wait for the magneto, and I think the next thing to do will be take the temporary block and gearbox out of there. I'll have to unbolt the torque tube, and then I can shift the gearbox over to the bench, and with appropriate packing, what I want to do is I'm going to have to lift up the front of the engine. I'll have to support the front because there's enough play in this pin in the holes that this moves a bit. So I want that sitting flat, and then I think I can use this little table to mount the gearbox up to it, and I can start having a look at that clutch housing, or the clutch mechanism rather. So it's definitely looking more and more like an engine every day. One final thing to mention, I was watching Kyle's channel the other day, and he mentioned the cost of steel and how expensive it was getting, and it's the same here. To have another go at making my radiator shell, I've ordered some more steel. I ordered 2 sheets of 1mm steel and 2 sheets of 1.2mm steel, which is 18 gauge, I think, as well as some tubing the right diameter to make the headers coming out of the block. So I bought 2 lengths of round tube and another 2 lengths of 1-inch square tube, which is actually for something else. That's for a stand to mount the tally on. but all of that, including the delivery, because I need it dropped off, came to over $1,000 New Zealand. So yeah, steel's getting fairly expensive. Speaking of steel being expensive, I use this to mix up some of the filler for the Land Rover bumper. Why is it? It's really hard to get filler to stick to a car, the panels on a car, but when you use a scrap of steel to mix the stuff up on, it will not come off it. I don't understand that. I've been bending this, trying to get it to pop off, and all it did was crack where it's really thick. Because yeah, I can't afford to waste steel like this now.